How you doing, guys? I want to tell you about a movie I watched on Netflix today. It's called The Burial of Kojo. It's a film. It came out in 2018. It's written and directed by a dude called Blitz. I'm gonna mispronounce his name probably. Bawa or Bazawale or something like that. Let me check on my phone real quick. Bazawale, yeah, Bazawale, yeah. So I'm so glad I had that on my phone. I probably butchered the pronunciation of his name, regardless. Yeah, Sam Blitz Bazawale. It's a very surreal movie, and that's the first reason why I like it. It's essentially about, without giving too much away in spoilers in the story, is about a girl and her relationship with her dad, and something happens to this girl's dad during the course of the movie, and she has to travel through this surreal kind of dreamscape world between worlds type of place in order to find him. That's the gist of the movie without giving away any crucial bits of storytelling. Um, First and foremost, here's what I liked about this film: the cinematography. You can tell every part. Even though this movie, I'm very aware that it doesn't have the budget of like an Inception, of think of any surreal Hollywood movie that comes to mind, classic film. I knew I was gonna like it from the beginning because they were showing me certain visuals that you can tell they're not thinking of this movie as just a film that's gonna show on someone's TV screen or someone's phone that they're streaming it, laptop, whichever. You can tell they're approaching this movie the way artists may approach like a painting, because there are certain shots that they linger on it, and the camera work and what you're seeing in it kind of. I don't know about you guys. I want to be careful as I say this because obviously I imagine it's not just people from similar back. I'm Ghanaian, if people don't know, and this movie takes place in Ghana. And I'll get to why I like that in a moment. But specifically, the cinematography reinforces certain feelings, sometimes a dread, that I've actually always associated with things to do with kind of ideas of like indigenous spirituality. That's probably the most PC way of saying what I'm thinking. Essentially, just like this movie, through the certain shots and certain characters that you see in the movie, it reinforces that kind of oh shit feeling that I associate with magic, and magic specifically, and the stories about magic associated with African cultures. Again, I say that not because my mind wants to like deliberately reinforce like negative ideas, but it's just because growing up, I think it's probably like a lack of storytelling that I saw about, or that I read about African mythology, which is heavily influences this movie, you can tell. But because of that, is like stuff to do with European or American Hollywoodized myths about creatures and places and all these surreal stuff. That seems more mundane to me, whereas unfortunately I've always associated that kind of imagery in African culture with something to be afraid of. And as I've gotten older, this movie helped a lot with realizing, no, you know what, the whole point of this movie and the whole point of my perspective watch this movie, it helps challenge some of those perceptions that no, this is not something to be afraid of. This is something take pride in, and that's something I've always liked, mythology. And as I learn more through like reading certain books, if you watch my channel, you've probably seen certain videos I've done about books I've read. Children of Blood and Bone comes to mind. I embrace it more as opposed to like the bad perception I had about certain things to do with stories of magic and all that stuff in African cultures. The cinematography of this movie, the look of this movie really helped with that. Like it didn't feel like some spooky like horror thing. It had it. I mean this in a good way. It had those vibes sometimes. Like I was scared of the unknown, but it felt like that as far as the story. And then me talking now, I'm realizing that it all comes back to the emotional connection between the father and the daughter in this movie. It's not even necessarily about the bigger ethereal stuff. That stuff is more like it just reinforces that connection. And that all to me comes from just looking at certain imagery in this movie that just lingers on people. Even though this is nothing to do with like surreal stuff. It could just be a shot of the daughter, her mom, just like looking worried, or the dad, like staring, like he might be smoking, he's just staring. Or do you know what I mean? It's like there's certain things you watch where when people linger on shots, when there's certain angles of, like there's certain upside down shots in this movie where I'm just staring and I'm like, what? Why won't they just show it the right way? It disorientates you, but I think it does it for the better as far as your viewing experience of this film, and that really attracted me. Like again, like I can't stress enough the camera work I loved in this movie, the cinematography, the way it looked. You can tell they put a lot of thought into this, and it was reinforced by a lot of ideas. I reckon probably to do with Ghanaian mythology, um, and fables and stories. Also, just like stuff to do with African cultures, and I love that. I love when movies show me that stuff. Yeah, because you do need to demystify some of those, because they're just traditions about myths, like oral traditions about myths. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing to be afraid of watching them. Um, I like that this movie, even though technically it was a short movie, you could tell that it felt there was something that felt like I was heavily invested in it. So I was drawn to it just through listening to people, just through the quiet moments. It wasn't when people were talking that I was most invested. It was all the moments in between. And I loved that. And speaking of the moments where people talked, that's another thing I liked about this movie. I love this was an African movie, even though it had a voiceover narration that was English. This movie was not in English. I didn't even know this was a Ghanaian movie. I still until I heard someone speak Tree, and then they started doing subtitles. I was like, "Oh, sugar!" For people who don't know, Tree is a language in Ghana, amongst many other languages that spoke there. That made me feel good, and I like that can have more to do with personal bias, but also I've seen Nigerian movies where people are speaking English a lot, and I may have to do with just marketing to like outside audiences, because obviously Nollywood movies, some Ghanaian movies are quite big out here, but they're more so big amongst black culture and people in the community, so in the diaspora. So it's a little weird to me when I see movie upon movie that's just English, people speaking English. I'm like, Yo, let me just show me a movie where people speak Tree or Ga, Fante, whichever, or Yoruba, Nigerian movies, Hausa, Igbo, whichever, Swahili, whichever places speak Swahili, you guys will know. I think Kenyans speak Swahili, Ugandans, I'm not sure. I effed that up. um, that's just the biggest thing. I don't have too much to say about this movie because I liked it so much. Lastly, one thing I'll say is that this actually reminded me of some of the Korean stuff I've seen lately. Um, Thrillers, movies. There's like big sections of Korean stuff on Netflix. I didn't just want to review for the channel because I've done some Korean stuff before, Kingdom, Squid Game. But speaking about this movie specifically, something that reminded me of some of the Korean films I've seen and TV shows, the stakes are serious. People, to me, don't feel like they have plot armor the same way they do in a Hollywood movie. And that partly scares me, speaking of popularity and like marketing these type of films to wider audiences. That partly scares me that the day we're gonna get that cinematography that I do associate with more Hollywood surreal movies is the more you get like a bastardization of what we have now, what came before, you know, where people there's very a Marvel movie stakes, not even Marvel movie. That's too far. Just average thriller or drama movie stakes that you might see in a movie out here or movie from the States, if you get what I'm saying. And without getting too specific, there's things that happen in this story that remind you, oh shoot, things just because you're invested in various characters doesn't mean things end well for them. And that made me feel some type of way. That, sometimes you have to deal with loss. It made me cry. This movie made me cry at the end of it, just thinking about it and thinking about how lucky I am to know my loved ones for as long as I have. And yeah, like they won't be around forever. And it helped me reconcile with that feeling. It did it. It helped me think about it. I don't know if it helped me reconcile that feeling. It made me think about it in a way that I usually push out of my mind because I don't want to go there because it just makes me sad. It brought it out of me, and I really like that about this film. Yeah, those are my thoughts essentially. Yeah, I have nothing else to say. Please, if you've seen this movie, please recommend more movies like this to me, where the cinematography is fire, where people you don't hear English in a lot of the movie. African films, independent. It doesn't have to be African films, but especially those where the dialogue is serious. It's not like some melodramatic, Nollywood or Gollywood type stuff. Yeah, if you know, comment down below. Tell me your thoughts regardless. Like, comment. Lastly, subscribe. The button's right there. Click, click. Other than that, guys, signing off. Salute.